Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Moving on is hard to do. Stopping doing something is not as hard to do. When things are done to you and they stop, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are moving on. Moving on, I think we can all agree, requires closure, it requires resolution, and these can mean different things for different people. I was a criminal prosecutor for Norfolk County for a while, and then I went into private practice, and a couple of years ago, I got a phone call from two men, ages 52 and 54, and there was something that they came to me and said, we want to sue a man who's now about 58, 59. What did he do? Back when that purported defendant was 18 years old and my clients were 12 and 14, the allegation was that this older man had molested them for a period of several years. And now 40 years had gone by and there was no sense for these men that they were able to move on. For years they had suffered with the memories of being abused by this man. And oftentimes when people come to lawyers and they're looking to sue someone, they're looking for monetary compensation. Sometimes they're looking for emotional resolution. Sometimes they're looking for other types of ways to move through in a cathartic way. The younger of the two men had basically expressed to me that he was very much interested in trying to recover some financial compensation for the harms that he had suffered. And his life had been very, very difficult, which he ascribed to the abuse that he had suffered. I made a very substantial demand upon the purported defendant, who had risen to a position of great prominence in the community and did not want any allegations of malfeasance, especially of this type, no matter how old they may have been. The defense attorney contacted me and basically said, Plaut, you have no case. The statute of limitations expired about 37 years ago. And part of moving on, especially in the context of the law, is the notion that if you don't bring a claim within a certain period of time, the claim becomes stale and memories start to fade, and the law will make you move on. There are exceptions to that, and one of the ways that the statute of limitations is told is if a person doesn't appreciate the harm that they have suffered, especially when one is younger. Those finer points aside, he said to me, listen, this case is so old and you have no evidence and it was consensual and all sorts of things. I made a demand, and this is, obviously I'm providing no names and there's no confidentiality issues here. I made a demand of $850,000. The defense attorney ignored me. A week or so later, lowered my demand to $700,000. Still no response. My client says, why are we going down? I said, in essence, because if we file a lawsuit, you're going to get nothing, because there was a great chance that this judge would dismiss the suit. So $1 would have been better than no dollars, in essence. Also, the scandal of raising allegations of this nature are harmful to all parties involved. I came down 700, 600, 500, 400, 300. Did I want to do this? No. The alternative, again, was nothing. I was down to $250,000. Still real no response from the other side. So my client says, we can't go down much further. I said, look, let's make a final demand of $75,000. The guy's got to take that. He says, that's too low. I said, it's better than zero, which is what you would get if we did the alternative, which is to file a lawsuit. So I call up this lawyer. I spoke to his assistant. I said to her, tell your boss that we are lowering our demand to $75,000. I get a call 5 minutes later from the lawyer, and he said, Plaut, I understand you're lowering your demand by $75,000. That's $175,000. We'll take it. I remember where I was when this happened. And so I get this settlement agreement. Now in settlement agreements state, no party admits any wrongdoing, and everyone maintains confidentiality, and no one can speak about this matter, no one can speak ill of the other. I get the settlement agreement. The 52-year-old client comes to my office along with his 54-year-old brother. And for the 52-year-old brother, this was a financial, it was a windfall in a way. But I mean, this was real compensation for what this man had suffered. And he didn't have really the means to make money generally. And this was an opportunity really for him to make himself set financially for life. This was a godsend for him, and it was wonderful. So I present the settlement agreement. Here you go. This is your ticket. Just sign right here, and all of this money will come to you. He signs it. Happy to sign it. John, happy to sign it. Hands it to his brother, and he reads it and says, I can't sign this agreement. And I said, why can't you sign this agreement? He said, because it says that I can't talk about this. That I can't, he says, I have 2 daughters, and I have now lived in silence for 40 years. And this is not the message that I want to send to my daughters. And I'm there, and the older brother's there, and the younger brother's there, and the younger brother is looking at his older brother, who's been very loving and a great caretaker of him, and he's like, this is my financial answer. I am basically destitute without this money. And this older brother had now his own crisis of conscience in trying to decide whether or not he is going to stand on the principle of acting in what he believes is the best interest of justice and the best interest of his daughters, and being a good role model for them, or take care of his younger brother financially. This is not something that they teach you in law school. These are these very complicated, difficult realities that people have to face when you are looking to move on for something. And in a case like this, what is the catharsis? What is the way that you are able to move on? And who are you hurting with your various choices? We ended up resolving the matter by the older brother was willing to sign in exchange for a power of attorney and medical release, so whereby the alleged perpetrator, who for the record denied everything, would agree to go to psychological counseling on a repeated basis, and that I would have the power and ability to consult with and work with and speak to his psychiatrist to address with the psychiatrist the ongoing issues that this alleged perpetrator was conversing about. So it was a very interesting resolution of this dispute, and it enabled the older brother to move on, and it enabled the younger brother to move on as well. So that's what I think.
So tonight is the last night that I'm going to be 49. And tomorrow, I'm moving on from my 40s, and I'll be 50. So I don't know how many of you out there have turned 50, but I find... Y'all look great. That's good. It's giving me some confidence. So I don't know if you went through this, but I've got 3 kids. And about a week and a half before each kid, I went through the standard nesting thing, where you clean. I would do things like move the piano from one side of the room to the other side of the room, or get my husband to move all the furniture from upstairs to downstairs. And I find I've been doing that for the past about 4 or 5 months of getting my life set, because I kind of feel like the canoe's going over the dam and I better get myself in it. So I was talking to a friend and I said, none of my clothes fit. Frankly, all of my clothes are from either my mother or my dead grandmother, and they've all worn out. They're both elegant women. I'm very lucky, but I gotta get some new clothes. And she said, well, she's a doctor. She said, I actually get all my clothes at Nordstrom's, and I get them by going to a personal shopper. It doesn't cost you anything, and if you give them your price point, you will just get right in there. They put it all in a room for you, and they'll tell you whether it looks good or not. This is not an ad for Nordstrom's. But I was like, well, that sounds great. She said, I'll take you to lunch. We can celebrate your birthday. So we set it up about 3 weeks ago. And I was running out of the house. I tried at least to brush my hair. I'm a really thrifty person, for instance. Just to give you a little aside, there was one time I had to go to a meeting on the South Shore, and usually I just drive without my glasses. But I was like, oh, I'm gonna be coming home in the dark. And so I realized my favorite pair of glasses had lost an arm. And if I put the glasses on, they kind of sat on my nose like a pince-nez, but they didn't work particularly well. And so my last minute dash thing, so I wasn't gonna crash the car, was I brought duct tape with me. And on the way home, and this is my Facebook page photo, so this is actually true, I taped the things onto my face, and I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest, like I don't care what happens at this meeting, I don't care if I sell the client, this is so hilarious. And I have these glasses taped to my face, this is just awesome. All right, so I'm putting that into the context of me, glasses taped to my face. This is the kind of person I am, and I'm going to a personal shopper at Nordstrom's, and my clothes are gonna, like, I have so few clothes, and they are so decrepit that I'm worried that if I walk into that dressing room, they're literally just gonna like sand, like just fall off me. All right, so I walk in, and it's lovely. They give you tea, they give you water. Obviously, my friend must spend a lot of money because they were really like upselling me on all of this. They were very respectful, and I said, I don't want to spend more than $80 on anything you put in the room. So just, except my boots. You like my boots? These are my new boots. And my new mom jeans. I got those too. So we go, and I don't know the etiquette to these things. So does the lady stay in there when I take my clothes off? I'm not particularly shy. You can stay in there. So I take my shirt off, and she goes, what is that? And I'm like, it's my bra. And she goes, what are you wearing? And I was like, it's my bra. It's my bra I wear every day. And I looked down, and I'm like, oh my God. It's my nursing bra. You know, the one with the little flaps? Like I hadn't gotten a bra. I have a 16-year-old. And my youngest child is now 9. And this was 3 weeks ago. Now, I do have to say I got a little chubby, so the nursing bra actually fit really well. So then, I don't know if you've ever been with people that critique your bra, but if you haven't, it's an experience. Well, Nordstrom's, as I'm sure many department stores, have people who will help you in these situations. And I remember like 20 years ago when I lived in New York, I had some bra issues back then too, because I'm really thrifty, as I said. And a friend made me go, and we went to the Upper West Side. Russian ladies. Russian ladies help you with bras. And not surprisingly, this Russian lady comes in. And they're always like, I don't do a very good Russian accent, but I can do a New York accent. They're like, what is this? What do you got? And I'm like, it's my nursing bra. She's like, I see nursing bras. What is that nursing bra? I'm like, oh, it's actually my nursing bra that I bought at building 19 and a half. She goes, I know, it looked terrible. It looked like Band-Aids, stitched together. So she goes, I get you bra. And she comes. And she brings me like 6 bras. We try them on. Now, the way they make you try them on, they like hike you up, they stick you in, and then they make you twirl like you're a ballerina, a really fat ballerina. And you do one of these. And they're pushing and pinching, and so they get you all set. And there I am. So she's like, no, does not do good. Husband not like. So she goes out, and she's like, I get you white one, I get you brown one, we need to get you red one. So she gets me this big red bra. And I won't display it this evening, but that is how I'm going to enter my 50s. Yeah. Using my big red bra.
I don't know if any of you remember the paper drives they used to have in the Catholic parishes around Boston. When I was a kid, you'd save your newspapers, and then once or twice a year, the men in the parish would get in their small trucks, their vans, drive around with the teenagers, throw the papers in the van, take them to a big parking lot where they had a big gigantic truck, like a moving truck. And us young kids would be in the truck, and they'd throw the papers into the truck, and then we would pile them up in the back, fill the whole truck up, and they would sell them to paper pulpers. It was like a precursor of recycling. And when I was a young kid, this was really exciting. I mean, you were hanging around with the teenagers and the men, you were throwing big bags of newspapers around the inside a truck. It was exciting. And it was particularly exciting for me because even at that age, I had a thing about printed word in newspapers and magazines and books. I always was fascinated. And I would, when I saw good stuff, kind of grab it, put it in a corner, take it home. When I was 12, I loved Reader's Digest. You know, they had the funny stories and the little cartoons and that. So 1966, I'm 12 years old, and I'm in the truck, throwing things around, and I see a book in horrible condition. The covers are missing, but I grab it, I look at it quick. It's got big print, it's got drawings, it's obviously a kid's book. I put it in my pile. Go home that night, I pull it out, I take a look at it. This is it. This is the book that I got in 1966. And I look at it, it's got big print, it's got a lot of pictures. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer's Comrade by Mark Twain. I start to read it. 20 pages into it, it's my favorite book in the history of the world. And the truth of it is that almost 50 years later, that's still the case. You know, it's a 12-year-old boy, he's sneaking out at night, he's having adventures, he's fooling every adult he sees, he runs away, he goes down the Mississippi River on a raft. This is a great story. But there's one problem, and it requires me to address something difficult, and that is the word nigger. Because in 1966, Boston was the most segregated city in the North. And in my neighborhood, we lived in the Forest Hills neighborhood of Jamaica Plain. I heard that word from the teenagers and the young men. We lived in an all-white neighborhood. Within a half a mile from our house, there were all black neighborhoods. There was violence, there was fights, there was riots, there was tension. And I heard that word used not in an ironic kind of way, in a hateful and vengeful and evil kind of way. I heard it used with as much force as it was used in 1956 in Mississippi and Alabama. And at the exact same time, I would go home and my parents would tell me that was the most horrible word you could say. No decent person would use that word. It was an evil, sinful word. I'd look at my nuns, the priest, every adult I respected. It was clear that wasn't a word used. And I knew, even as a 12-year-old, that was a powerful, powerful, powerful word. But I'm reading this kid's book, and it's thrown around like the most casual thing there is. The nigger did this, the nigger did that, the nigger Jim. Just a casual word. And I think I realized, even when I was 12 years old, I couldn't have articulated it this way. But I understood that what was going on is, this was set in a world that was ruled by human slavery. A word was nothing compared to that evil. And using that kind of word was nothing compared to that evil. But I went on reading the book, and I was fascinated by it, and I loved it. And I got to page 183 in the book. And I got to what I think is the most important scene maybe in American literature. Because when I got to page 183, Huck Finn had a crisis of conscience. He realized he had done a terrible and hateful and sinful thing. He had stolen the property of Miss Watson. He had stolen her slave. She had done nothing but good for him, and he stole her slave. He was no better than the worst slave-stealing abolitionist and was going to go to hell for her. And he writes her a letter, and he says, "Dear Miss Watson, here's where I am, and here's where your slave Jim is, and here's where you come and get us." And he feels good for a minute. He puts the letter down. He looks at it. He thinks about what he's been through with Jim coming down the river. And he says, "It was a close place. I took up that note and I held it in my hand. I was a-trembling because I got to decide forever betwixt two things, and I noted. I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath, and then I says to myself, all right then, I'll go to hell." And I tore the note up. This 12-year-old white trash runaway succeeded in figuring out the right thing to do, and every respectable, educated adult that he knew failed. I finished the book. I loved reading the whole book. It was exciting. It was fun. I was disappointed at the end of it, like everybody else is, until I got to the very last sentence, which is all the loose ends are, all tied up, and they want to take Huck back to civilize him again with his aunt. And he says, "I reckon I got to light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before." And it sounds kind of corny in a way, but I tell you, when I look back now, there's part of me that feels like that night in 1966, up in my bedroom in 15 Wenham Street in Jamaica Plain, when I finished this book, that's when I started to move on. That's when I started to light out for that territory where you can't depend on what your teachers and your preachers tell you. I couldn't depend on what my mother and father tell me. As scary and as terrifying as it was, I had to figure out on my own which path it was to follow. Thank you.
I don't know if any of you know my background. I'm a Nonantum kid. I grew up down in Nonantum all my life, and the Boys and Girls Club of Newton, which used to be the Newton Boys Club, was situated on Dalby Street in Nonantum. It was basically just a neighborhood place to go for the neighborhood kids. It had started so many years ago in the old St. Jean's Church on Dalby Street, and around the time of 1995, I've been a lifelong member. I've been there all my life. I can remember my first day, 6 years old, going in there, 7 years old, playing basketball and meeting Dave Sells Sr., who's been a mentor to me all my life. And I remember just staying involved with the Boys and Girls Club until I was about 17 years old, so I could be a member. And then around the time I left the Boys and Girls Club but stayed involved, I was a staff member for a period of time, and they decided to move on. They decided to move on to a bigger and better place, a little bit further down the street towards, if you're familiar with it, it's on Watertown Street next to the Horace Mann School and the Albemarle Playground. So at the time, I was about 25 years old. I had just gotten on the board of directors of the Boys and Girls Club. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing in life. I'm out of college, I'm working, but I wanted to stay involved with the Boys and Girls Club. And they had made this decision to sort of move on because they felt that they had something to offer more just than the kids in Nonantum, but they had more to offer throughout the entire city of Newton. And when they had decided this plan, I was a new member to the board of directors, they had been in talks with the city to move to the old water yard. That's the current location. And so I remember being a new member of the board of directors, and we were in these talks with the city, and we had to come up to City Hall numerous evenings and come up, and I'm going, why am I going to City Hall all these evenings and all these meetings? I see a lot of people raising their eyebrows, but I'm trying to do my best to help with that, folks. But the point was, we're going up there, and we're talking with the city, and we're negotiating, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, this is pretty cool. I kind of like coming up here every night and seeing how the city works and city government works and how this is happening with an entity that I'm so close to. And eventually, they were able to move on to their new home on Watertown Street. This wonderful jewel of an entity that had served so many kids in one neighborhood was now moving on to a bigger and better place that to this day I'm still involved with. To this day, I spoke with the executive director today, who happens to be the son of the director when I was there, David Sellers Jr., and had mentioned to me today that the Boys and Girls Club in Newton serves over 600 members and serves almost 2,000 children across the city. And I just was filled with joy when I heard those numbers. But I remember when they were moving on, there was a lot of anxiety in Nonantum because the community of Nonantum didn't know what was going to happen to the Boys and Girls Club. Our neighborhood place was leaving, and it was moving down the street, but it was part of our fabric. It was part of lifelong relationships that I had been a part of for 20, 30 years. We didn't know what was going to happen. But by then moving on, and by me helping that situation and coming up to City Hall for so many nights and so many meetings and so many different things in trying to get that situated, I saw another calling, and I saw public service, and I saw how that worked, and I really wanted to be involved. And then about 2 years after that was the first time I ran for public office because of my experiences of what happened with the Boys and Girls Club. I wasn't successful, but I ran again, and now I'm 14 years in, serving my wonderful city and my home, and it's the most wonderful experience in the world. But in trying to think of the theme, and I'm putting them together, this wonderful organization moved on. I stayed with them. They helped me to move on in life, to do what I'm doing and what I enjoy. They're doing well. I feel I'm doing well by serving my community. And these two things have come together. Both of them have impacted my life, but that one aspect and that one movement of them moving from point A to point B and moving on from their old facility has changed the lives of thousands of kids in the city, and has changed my life for the better. And I love what I do, and I love serving this city, and it's a story I wanted to share, and hopefully that you keep that in mind when you think of the Boys and Girls Club, of how they moved on from this small neighborhood entity, that they're serving a greater good, and I'm continue to try to serve the greater good. So thank you very much.
My name is Jen. I've lived in Newton for close on to 20 years now, and in 2006, April 15th, tax day, we had the taxes all in the envelope ready to take down to the post office in the morning. About 2 a.m., I found myself suddenly awake when I had been very soundly asleep. And that can be very disconcerting. I didn't know why I was awake. My husband was awake as well. He leaped out of bed, snatched his robe off the back of the door, and headed for the exit to our bedroom. And I was starting to process. I think I heard something. I heard a noise. And so I looked out of the window next to the bed. I looked out into the yard. I thought perhaps a car had crashed on the street. It happens where I live with some regularity. I didn't see anything. I looked down. We were on the second floor, so what I'm seeing is at ground level, and I couldn't understand it. It was the front end of a car. And I didn't know what to make of that, because there shouldn't be a front end of the car there. That shouldn't be possible. And so I got my robe and headed for the stairs as well, and I realized I was starting to sense a smell, some sort of smell. I couldn't identify it. And I headed towards the stairs, and I was starting to hear a voice from downstairs. My husband was talking to somebody. And I'm belting on my robe, and I'm heading for the stairs, and I'm confused, and it's dark, and there's beginning to be a sort of a smoke or something. I can see something in the air, but I don't know what it is. And I come down to the stairs, and I turn the corner to the living room that's directly underneath of our bedroom, and the front of the house is gone, and there's a car in the living room. The back end of the car is on our carpet, and the front end of the car has gone past the living room through the neighboring wall out into the yard, which was what I was seeing from above. It was extremely surreal, and I'm starting to get shaky, and I'm starting to have the adrenaline rush, and my husband is shouting at this man, "You're not okay, your car is in our living room, you're not okay." We live down the street from the fire station. It takes very little time for emergency vehicles to arrive. Meanwhile, we're trying to keep this guy from getting up and walking out of the front wall of our house and leaving, because he's just crashed his car through our house. We want to make sure he's okay, and also that he doesn't get away. It was, of course, extremely shocking, and we had 3 ferrets at the time. We got them into their carry cage and left the house with them out to the side porch. I saw somebody standing next door to our house taking pictures, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? And I found out the next day he was our neighbor. He had been at the hospital on shift, and he came home from work to find all this going on. He came to take pictures in case it was something that might help us with insurance claims or we needed a record. It was actually very kind of him to do that. We called a friend, and once we had been checked out and everything was okay with us, we went to stay at the friend's house. We were there for about a week while we tried to figure out what we were going to do. It's not our home. We've rented for a very long time. So at the very least, putting together the house again was not our headache. We found a place in Central Square where we could camp out basically for the 2 months that it took to rebuild the house. The majority of our stuff stayed in the house. We could occasionally come back in and collect a suitcase of clothes or some particular piece of paper that we might need. We bought a new ferret cage so that we could set it up there and the ferrets would have somewhere to stay. And after 2 months, our house was rebuilt. We had renter's insurance, so we were able to replace our belongings. The landlord, of course, had insurance on the house, and the young man who crashed his car into our house, of course, was liable for paying for some of those damages. During the rest of that summer, I was trying to keep track of getting reimbursed for insurance was just a pain. You can imagine, a pain in the rear, but we did. So there was not a problem with it, but it was very all-consuming. It was very involving. And I went to court to see what happened to him. He was required to complete a alcohol-related, treatment of some sort, not a very lengthy one. He lost his license and was not allowed to drive for a period of time. He didn't have to go to jail. Things were not great for him, but he was unhurt. He had been at a Red Sox game, and then he had been at a bar, and on his way home, and he wasn't all that far from home. He fell asleep at the wheel, missed the curve, went over the sidewalk, through our fence, and then through our house. We moved back in, we got new furniture. We called a contractor, and we said, "Do you have any big rocks?" So we had a guy come, and he brought us 4 granite boulders. We named them Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan. And they now guard the front of our house. We had heard from neighbors who had had similar incidents happen to them that getting a guardrail put in can be an involved process. And so we figured, you know what, we'll put the rocks there. If anybody else comes through the fence, they're probably not going to go through the rocks. And then time went on, and we kind of forgot about it. The new living room was actually kind of better than the previous one. I didn't think about it much. And then this past fall, I'm home with my kids, and somebody knocks at the door, and I open the door and I ask him, "Miss, can I help you?" He said, "Yeah, I ran into your house." I'm thinking, oh, okay. He said, is now the time to talk? I said, no, it's not. It's not a good time to talk. Can you come back another time? When my husband is here, would be better. And so he did. He came back a few days later, and during those few days, I had some time to think about what he might say and what I might say. That corner of the living room is actually a place where, at the time, my husband was spending a lot of nights sleeping. He's got restless legs. He didn't want to be waking me up. So he could easily have been killed. I was really traumatized for a long time, and then other things covered it up. And so I started thinking about when he wanted to make amends, because something else finally made him hit rock bottom, and he was doing the steps of the program. What could I say? And what I finally could say is that when I think back on that now, despite all the terror and the hard work and all of the things that were involved in coming back from that, camping out in that apartment in Central Square for 2 months was fun. I would never have lived there. I listened to a lot of baseball games while I played solitaire on my laptop. I don't think now about the bad parts of it. What I took away from it were the good parts of it. And so I don't think I really ever gave it a lot of thought, but when he came back all these years later, I realized that I must have moved on, and I left behind the bad parts.
So this is a story about trying to move on. Let me just catch my breath. About 20 years ago, I rode my bike to Niagara Falls. It was part of an ill-conceived plan to go across the country. I was going to ride my bike to Niagara Falls, send my bike back to Boston, take a bus to St. Louis, and then drive the rest of the way with a friend. So I got to Niagara Falls. It was kind of a harrowing trip. It involved a lot of heat, a lot of mountains. I didn't know the Catskills were mountains. A lot of semi-trucks. Anyway, I got to Niagara Falls, and I'm sitting sort of repairing the damage of the ride, looking out at the falls. And I'm looking around, and I notice an uncanny number of clowns. Like 24, 10-year-old, juggling, stilt-walking clowns, and just sort of meandering. And as I'm marveling at the clowns, the physical incarnation of Ned Flanders comes up to me and says, "Howdy." And he strikes up a conversation. I tell him about my ride, and he says, "Well, when you're out there on the road, I bet you get a lot of time to think." I said, "Yeah, but you're usually thinking, let the wind stop." And he says, "No, I bet you get a lot of time to think about your relationship to the Almighty." And he kind of slides into his Jesus patter. And as he's doing this, the clowns are swarming. The clowns are gathering. And he's talking to me, and the clowns, I'm surrounded by, like, red polyester hair coming up this high. And one of them looks up at me and says, "Have you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior?" I got out. I got away from Clowns for Christ. The next day, I don't know how the next day happened, but the next day, the only thing I had to do was to send my bike back to Boston. I don't know why I thought this would be easy. I thought like bike rack on the back of a UPS truck. So I go to the UPS store and they say, well, you got to buy this plastic crate and it's $400 and then $100 to send it. And I'm thinking, oh, I can't do that. Bike's not worth that. So I go to the post office and the post office guy says, yeah, we can do it, but you have to box it up, and we don't have a box that big. And we close at 1, it's Saturday, right? We close at 1, which is an hour and a half from now. So I make my way to a bike store, and I convince a guy to give me a box from downstairs in the basement that the bikes come in, and I kind of sink down on a plaza in the middle of Niagara Falls and start disassembling my bike manically with like a hammer and a toothpick, throwing parts into this box. And I'm going completely crazy. And it's like 1:15. There's no way I'm going to do this, and it's going to be days. And I'm thinking of like never leaving. And a cab pulls up. And a guy who had to have been the model for Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski leans out and says, "Can I give you a hand?" I say, "No." "Well, yeah." And I explain the whole story, cabs, UPS, and send a bike, and this, that, and he says, "Well, have you tried the place on 22nd Avenue?" "No." "Put the box and the parts in the car and get in." "Okay, I'm willing to take advice." So I get in the car and we drive to 22nd Avenue, and on 22nd Avenue there's this new shipping place, and I get the box and the parts into the shipping place, and there's a guy there who says, "Sure, we can do this." And he helps me box up the bike, wraps the whole thing up, tapes it. $50 later, and the bike's gone. Yay me, right? So I go back out to the cab, get back in with the dude, and he says, "Where to?" I say, "Well, I'm not staying at the hostel again. That was a nightmare." I said, "I need a cheap place to stay." And he drives me, he says, "Have you thought about the dunes?" "No." And he drives me to the seediest motel I have ever seen. But it's cheap and it has air conditioning. So he pulls his business card out of his pocket and he hands it to me. And it says, "Rainbow Taxi, Rocky Taxi, Operator." And I said, "Well, what do I owe you?" And he says, "Do something good for somebody else." And that's it. And he splits. Free. Wow. So what I take from this, my personal savior in moving on, I did not accept Christ as my personal savior to move on. My personal savior was Rocky Taxi, Operator.
So I am the mother of 3 boys, and so with that comes a lot of stories. But the one I want to share tonight about moving on involves my son Knox, who is 8. And when he was 3, he was diagnosed with autism. And when your child is diagnosed with autism, your whole life shifts. When you have a baby and you think about what their life is going to be like, you think about the prom, and you think about, them staying up all night with someone and falling in love. But you don't think about going to therapy appointments all the time. But with that diagnosis, that's exactly what happened. So we got the diagnosis, and they said there's 5 towns you can move to. For my son, for his type of autism, the spectrum, he had to be in a quote-unquote high IQ town. So they said, your choices are Newton, Newburyport, Wellesley, Bedford, or Lexington. We were living in Chelsea. Chelsea is one of the lowest income, poorest cities in the state, and we were told we had to move to Newton, one of the wealthiest. We had just finished renovating our home, which we did with our own, basically, blood, sweat, and tears. And within days, that house was on the market because we were in survival mode and we needed to save him. We needed to do everything we could. So, from 2009 to about 2013, we were in survival mode. And we did everything to try to save this boy. And we got, day after day, hard news. He was behind on this, he was behind on that, he wasn't where he should be on this. And when you get that day after day after day, it breaks you. To me, he was perfect. I felt like nobody else could see it. So, he's improving. In 2014, I enroll him in a piano lesson, right across the street here, jamming with you. And we have lessons with this guy, Josh. And Josh walks in, and he's not at all what I envision as a piano teacher. He's got tattoos up and down his arms. He's got baggy pants and earrings, and he's hip. It was great. And what he also has is this ability to connect with children. And he connected with my child in such a way that he lit a fire in his belly for the piano, like nothing I've ever seen. In 1 year, my 7-year-old learned 146 songs. He did about 3 years worth of work in one. We found out a few weeks ago that he has perfect pitch, which for anybody, I'm not a musician. I don't know where I got these genes. But that means that you've got a keyboard with 88 keys. If you hit one of those keys and he's in the next room, he'll say, oh, that was a C. If I knock on this piece of wood, he'll say, that was a D. If I say to him, can you hum an E? He can hum an E perfectly. It's something that 1% of the population has. So my son, who for years, we went through this grueling process of hearing what was wrong with him. He was off on this and behind on this and behind on that. My son was ahead on this. And for the first time, we heard something positive. And so, I am eternally grateful to that man over there. Because while all these other people helped, these clinicians, they focused on his weaknesses. And he was the first one to find his gift and pull it out. So while we moved on physically from Chelsea to Newton, Josh finding his gift as piano helped me move on emotionally from the scars of the initial diagnosis. Thank you.
My mother told me, never speak to strangers. Sometimes a stranger can be your best friend. It was in the early 70s. I was a teacher at the Carol Morgan School in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. We had an Easter vacation, and I had decided to go to Caracas, Venezuela. Well, I went to our friendly travel agent, Mr. Prieto, who all the veteran teachers patronized, and then the newbies also went to him. Back then, Mr. Prieto had a large telephone directory style catalog, and that's where he would look up your flights, your destinations, your time. This is before computers. This is before travel software. So I had my ticket, and I had a great vacation, and I was on my way back. the school was quite generous. They gave us an additional day for traveling back. So the first day back was going to be Tuesday. I left the hotel in Caracas, and I was grabbing a cab with another couple. We got to the airport. Went to the desk to check in, and the clerk said, "This flight left 15 minutes ago." I said, "How could that be? It says 10:30. He said, "No, that flight's gone. There's been some sort of mix-up. Apparently, Mr. Prieto was using the old directory, which had expired. Now it's the spring directory, and he had not begun using it." Well, I was frantic because I was a very conscientious teacher, and I didn't want to miss a day. They were giving us that extra day as a leeway, and here it was a bomb. So I figured the dilemma. I have to get back to the city, and then I have to contact my roommates for them to make all the arrangements. So the taxi's long gone. I have to lug this luggage out to the street, find a new driver. I'm really frazzled. The reservation clerk noticed this, and he said, "Oh, here's this damsel in distress. Can I help you?" I said, "Well, this is a situation." He said, "I'm getting off duty in 30 minutes, and I'm going back into the city. So I would, be very pleased to take you back." I didn't care who this man was. I didn't care about anything. He works for the airlines. He must be fairly respectable. So I said, "It's a deal." So he said, "Just go here and wait for me. I'll be through in a half an hour." So I sat down and thought the best idea will be to pick a new hotel that's closest to the airport. That way it'll eliminate that extra distance of going back into Caracas proper. So we got into the car, and I said, "I think this is what I should do." He said, "I think that's fine, because there's a very nice mid-priced hotel on the way back by the beach." Great. So we got to the hotel. I thanked him profusely, went in. Luckily, they had a vacancy. So I was all set. Now the next step was to contact my roommates to tell them what had happened. So my Spanish was rather elementary, and I knew that they didn't have telephones in each hotel room. This is way before cell phones. So you had to make a phone call from the desk through the operator of the telephone company. So I figured, okay, now I have to think of my home phone number. I never call myself. What's my phone number? Oh, God. So I have this little book in my handbag. I took it out. I'm flipping through the pages. I don't see the phone number there. Even on the ID page, nothing. So I hurriedly thought, well, we got to call the landlady, and then she will have her daughter run over and get Abby. So I'm still frazzled, putting the phone call through. The line got cut. There's a gentleman sitting in the lobby. He saw what was going on. He said, I can help you out. I'm an American businessman and I know Spanish. So he put the call through and made sure I got credit on that other call that didn't go through. So I got Abby on the line. I explained the situation. This is what happened. Call Mr. Wansley to get a sub. She said, fine, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. So, next time. Just to repeat I believe I was at the hotel where the reservations clerk had very graciously dropped me off. I profusely thanked him, and I went to the registration desk. Luckily, there was a vacancy. So I completed all the paperwork, and I knew the next thing had to be to call back home to my roommates to tell them what had happened. So I have elementary Spanish. It was an American international school, so the language of instruction was English. And the Spanish I had learned was, it was enough to get around at the stores and smile a lot. So I said, okay, let me get my phone number and call. This call has to go through the telephone operator. So my phone number. What's my phone number? I never call myself. So I have a little book in my handbag, and I'm flipping through the pages. I've never jotted down, even on the ID page of my little book, nothing. So the best thing is going to be to call the landlord next door, and she'll send her daughter over to get one of my roommates. Okay, so I had that number. I get on the phone. The operator is placing the phone call. The line cuts. Silence. So now I have to try over again, and I'm really pulling the hair out of my head. There's a gentleman sitting in the lobby, and he's taking this all in. So he comes up to me and says, I'm an American businessman. I speak Spanish fluently. Can I help you? Can you help me, please? He said, just give me the number, and I'll talk to the operator, and I'll have them delete that charge from your bill. So he called my landlord, and she sent her daughter scampering over to get my roommate. So I said to Abby, look, I'm stuck in Caracas. This is what happened. You have to call Mr. Wansley to get a sub. So I'll be home the next day. So I'm still shaking, and this gentleman says, why don't you come and sit here in the lobby and just relax for a few minutes, take a deep breath. Everything is going to be okay. So he asked me about the Carol Morgan School, how was it that I was teaching there, how was Caracas, so forth. So he said, I have something to ask you. I said, oh, here it comes. He said, would you be so kind as to have dinner with me this evening? He said, I just want the company. No strings attached. So I thought, well, I really need this. So I said, fine. He said, go up to your room, unpack, take a hot bath, have a nap, get dressed, and meet me down in the dining room at 7 o'clock. I had my orders, so I did that. And I came down, he was already sitting at a table. He had ordered me a drink. I needed it badly. So turns out this fellow is an ex-Marine from Wisconsin, and he travels the world in his line of work. He works for a diamond mining company in South Africa, and he had some very fascinating stories. And I reminded him of a past girlfriend in Wisconsin. I usually do. So we had a lovely evening, talked about our travels and so forth, and then we finished our dessert and coffee. I thanked him. I went back up to my room. The next day, I couldn't wait to get back to Santo Domingo to call Prieto.
I think I'll tell you a story. Girlfriends don't matter. Many years ago, I was hitchhiking around Ireland, and I met a woman She made a huge impression on me, and I only spent a couple hours with her. And when we parted ways, we exchanged phone numbers and addresses. And 3 years later, the phone rang, and it was her. She was coming to see me in Boston. So she arrived here, and within a day or two, we had fallen wildly, madly, crazily in love. It was just, most amazing thing. She was supposed to be here for 2 weeks. She extended her stay for a third week. At the end of the third week, she flew back to Belfast, and I quit my job. I lined up some freelance work, and I moved to Northern Ireland. Now, my family and my friends thought I was out of my mind. This was like the late 80s. Northern Ireland was a war zone. The IRA were blowing up buildings everywhere. The streets were filled with British soldiers and machine guns, and checkpoints. It was an armed camp. Excuse me. And, but I wouldn't be dissuaded. I met the woman I love, and that was it. So off I went and moved to Ireland. And I was living there about 9 months with her, and we decided to go to Greece on a vacation. We got these cheap tickets. And a few days before we went, I lost my passport. So there's panic. I can't go without the passport. So I go to the consulate in Belfast, the U.S. consulate, and they were great. They jumped through hoops. About 15 minutes before the office closed, the night before we left, they issued me a brand new U.S. passport, stamp, Belfast, Northern Ireland. Off we go. So we go to Greece. We spend the week. We're coming home. We're flying from Athens to London, then the short hop over to Belfast. So we arrive in London at Heathrow Airport in the evening, and we get off the plane. We have to go through customs and immigration. So we get off, and there's this huge line for EU passports. Everybody on the plane, including my girlfriend, EU passports. And then there's the other line. Nobody's in it, and that's me, other. So I laugh. I say, I'll see you out of the terminal. I go up, give the guy my passport. He opens it up. As soon as his eyes set on Belfast, Northern Ireland, alarm bells goes off. He picks up the phone, he says something. A minute later, a guy comes, come with me. They walk me down a corridor, down another corridor, down some stairs, open a door, wait here. They put me in, I'm in this small windowless room, a table and 2 chairs, and I wait. And it seems like forever. It's probably like 3-4 minutes, but I'm like, I don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, the door opens up. This guy comes in, no introduction, just comes in, sits down, and starts rapid fire, asking me questions. What are you doing in England? I'm just passing through. Where are you going? Northern Ireland, Belfast. Well, what are you doing there? I said, well, I'm just there to be with my girlfriend. How long have you been there? 9 months. How are you supporting yourself? I said, well, I'm doing some work for a company in Boston. Where's their office in Belfast? Well, they don't have an office in Belfast. Well, then why did they send you here? No, they didn't send me here. I'm here to be with my girlfriend. And this, so I don't understand. And so it starts going in circles. And it dawns on me, girlfriend doesn't mean anything. Like in immigration, mother, father, sister, brother, wife, husband, even fiance, they all have legal meanings and definition. Girlfriend doesn't exist, So the whole point of what I'm here to be with my girlfriend, and he's totally, so the conversation goes in circles. They keep me there over an hour, grilling me the whole time, and it's very exhausting. At the end of an hour, he goes out. A couple minutes later, another guy comes in. This guy has a clipboard. He starts in again, same thing, and he's even more, and he starts asking me, who do I know in London? I don't know anybody in London. Are you sure? How many times have you been in London? So it's going on, and I'm starting to feel guilty. I don't know what this, so after 5-10 minutes, I say, I kind of interrupt and I say, excuse me, my girlfriend's out in the terminal. She has no idea where I am. She'll be looking for me. Can you at least send a message saying I'm being held here? And the guy, I'll never forget this, the guy sort of just suddenly changes tone and gives me this sort of canned speech. And he says, you are not a citizen of the United Kingdom. You are applying for entry into this country. You must answer all of our questions to our satisfaction, or we will bar you entry, and we will not tell you why. Until you set as such time as you answer all those questions, you're being held incommunicado. I said, damn, next question, please. So on it goes, and it goes on and on. A little while later, it keeps coming back to who do I know in London? Nobody. All of a sudden, he pulls out the clipboard. While you've been held here, we've gone through your bags. Inside of one of your bags is a paperback book. Inside the back cover, there are 3 London addresses. I want to know who those people are. I want to know how you know them, and I want to know now. I was like, I have no idea. It's not my book. It was in your bag. No, I know the book. I borrowed it. It's a novel. It's just I was reading it. It's my girlfriend's. So this goes on. I was kept for 2.5 hours, just grilled the whole time. And suddenly, for no apparent reason, they took my passport, stamped 30-day visa, and said, you're free to go. I came out of there. I was completely exhausted. Didn't know what this. I was freaked out. I'd come out through the swinging doors into the terminal, and there's my girlfriend waiting. I was never so happy to see anybody in my life. And she had been freaking out for the last hour and a half. I had disappeared. She had been all over the airport looking for me. She had gone to immigration thinking maybe I had got held up and they wouldn't confirm or deny anything because that's what they do. So she just waited. So it's very weird because, here's this thing where I had kind of given up everything. I had quit my job and left my family and friends and flew across the ocean, to be with this woman. And yet, our relationship, it didn't mean anything. It was kind of weird. Anyway, we had missed the last flight to Belfast. We hopped in a cab, we went to a hotel, and about half an hour later, suddenly, without any thought or plan or whatever, it just struck me that it's time to move on. And I asked her to marry me. And she said yes. And she's right over there. So for the last 28 years, we've enjoyed a relationship that even the immigration office can appreciate.
Once upon a time, summer of 1970, in a land far away, Cambridge, a dropout hippie girl was trying to figure out how to move on. And so I thought I wanted to go to California, see the world, or see the country. Thought maybe a bicycle would be a good way to do it, but that seemed pretty strenuous and hard to carry everything. Maybe hiking, no, it's too strenuous. How about riding a horse? That would be nice. And maybe I could have another person, I could have 2 horses and we could go that way. Or a car, but then I was a little fearful that I'd break down along the road with my limited funds and, it's going to be an old car and get it taken advantage of at all the gas stations along the way. So I decided to buy a team of horses and a covered wagon. And I went up to New Hampshire and went and found Jim Seavey in Stratton, New Hampshire. We called him Fat Chance. And he sold us a team of horses, and he was building a big oak hay wagon. And so we got some canvas and covered it and wrote "California or Bust" on the back of the canvas. We had a big sunshine on the side. It said, "Chew thy food." And I recruited 4 other friends. We had a dog, we had a pair of stilts, a bicycle strapped to the side so that we could, go off on go shopping or whatever, I don't know, on the way, find where we're gonna camp. So anyway, 4th of July we set out. So I was there with my long rainbow skirt on, hair parted down the middle, of course, and Ward with his hair out to here, and off we go. 4th of July, our Independence Day, and we got 1/8 of a mile down the road, and the front wheel hits a guardrail. And so here's Ward driving the horses and flying out the window, flying out the front of the wagon, and the wagon stops and he goes on, the horses keep going. So Mr. Seavey drove us, towed us back to the farm, re-welded the axle, and off we go again, the 5th of July. So we had calamities almost every other day. We left the bridle on the horses at a rest time and broke the bridle, so we were learning how to use an awl. And we went over a open steel bridge. You could see the water down below, that kind of bridge. Anyway, the horseshoes ripped off the horses' feet, and so they got the nails sticking up, and that was kind of scary. We got good at shoeing the horses. These are big draft horses, by the way. Canadian chunks is what they told us their names were. I mean, their brand was. And it was Tony and Dolly were the two horses. There was that. There was the time in Saratoga Springs where something happened. We were camping in a gas station in the middle of town. In a gas station, the two horses, the five hippies, and a dog. And the horses got away, ran into the rose garden, and right in the next person's house. And so Ward is yelling and screaming at the top, swearing at the top of his voice. So that was exciting. We went to Cooperstown Farmers Museum, and because the horses need to be shod again. And again, we're standing there and all the tourists are looking, and Ward again is shoeing the horses' feet, and the blacksmith there said the only problem was he didn't swear enough, otherwise he was a good demonstration for a blacksmith. So basically our days were about 20 miles. We could make 20 miles on a good day. And every hour we'd stop, water the horses, and at lunch we'd stop for a whole hour. And that harnesses, can you imagine how heavy those harnesses were? We had to put the harnesses on the horses, and we slept underneath the wagon with the horses tied to the wagon. Just trying to find a place to stay every night was fun. We got interviewed at lots of newspapers. We came up with lots of stories. People wondered if we were runaways. It's like, no. So anyway, we made it 40 days and 40 nights to Ithaca, where my brother was living on a commune. So we made it up to the top of Dawes Hill Commune, and there was no barn or anything, but they quickly built a barn, and anyway, they said we'll keep your horses if you want, and I said, well, that was when I was not going to move on. I said, if you keep my horses, you have to keep me. So I stayed there 7 years, 2 babies, a husband, and it was a good time.
So this is a quickie. Well, sort of a quickie. I'm sure all of you, when you're with your relatives, you have the best time, you laugh and all this kind of stuff. Well, I have a family that are hysterical. Everybody. Unfortunately, many of them have moved on. So I want to tell you a story about my favorite Aunt Jessie. My Aunt Jessie, my Aunt Ida, and my mother Gertrude were really, really close buddies. And my mother at the time was moving on to her better place. And my Aunt Ida came to visit, and I thought, oh, Aunt Ida, you look so beautiful. And she said, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And went home. The next day, my Aunt Jessie went to pick Ida up to take her back to my mother to say her farewells. And my Aunt Ida had passed on, moved on, as we're saying to me. Well, I have 3 sisters. I have a twin sister and 2 older sisters. And we did not know what to do. Who was going to tell my mother? Even though my mother was moving on, she was still conscious, she knew what was going on. Who was going to tell my mother that Ida died? So we decided Jessie would be the best one to tell my mother. Now, Jessie is a character. She was so funny. She made everybody laugh all the time. She would walk into a party, for instance, and she'd walk in and everybody would say, oh, Jessie, you're here, isn't it? Well, hi, Jessie. And she'd stand there, and she'd look around, and she'd say, you know what? I'm the prettiest one here. So that was Auntie Jessie's sense of humor. Auntie Jessie, before she was moving on, I went to see her. She's lying down, it was within a week, and she slept a lot and off and on. I said, Auntie Jessie, hi. She said, Jane, I don't like your hair. And then she'd wake up again. I'd say, Auntie Jessie, why? What do you... I like it better long. That's what you do. She went back to sleep. But this is Auntie Jessie. All right, Auntie Jessie was the designated person to tell my mother about Ida. Okay. My sisters and I are standing outside the door. We're all like sick inside because, the three sisters, you can imagine, right? So Jessie goes up, she said, Gertrude, I have something to tell you, dear. Ida is gone. And my mother said, gone? What do you mean gone? And Jessie says, Gert, Ida's gone. And my mother said, Ida, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Ida's gone, Jessie. What do you mean? And Jessie said, Gertrude, Ida's gone. And I don't mean to Florida.
We had kind of a fancy garage when we lived on North Wilson Avenue. I was about 5 because it was 2 stories high. It had real windows in it, and it had a little cupola on top. And I thought it would be a great place to have a play. And if you opened the doors really wide, it was beautiful, this big black space with these doors on either side. It looked just like the stage at the end of the high school gym. And I thought it would be great to have a play, but I didn't know how to make a play. And my father had said that I was not to play in the garage. And he said it was dangerous, and I knew, all right, there's dead bats and there's live mice, and it smells funny, but it's not dangerous. And then one day I was playing near the garage, and because I couldn't go in it, I was around it a lot, and I watched my dog go in and out of the little hole for her for when it rained. And I thought, I wonder if I would fit in there. And I was 5, and I fit. And I went in and out a few times, and I thought, my mother can see this hole from the kitchen, and she's going to enforce my dad's ruling. But she didn't do it that day, and I thought, it's just like, as I've been thinking, my dad just makes up some of these rules so as to let us know who's boss. So I had these friends, Joni and Shirley Grover, and they could do wonderful cartwheels and somersaults, and I thought, we could have a circus. And we had another friend, Jimmy Stewart, who was living across the street, and he had an arm that he could kind of make it look like an elephant's trunk, and we thought that would be a good act, but I thought, we needed something more daring, dangerous. And so to try it out, I spread a long rope across the cinder driveway right in front of the door, and I walked along it very carefully with my arms out to the side so I wouldn't fall off. And I wanted to make it look very dangerous, which actually was pretty easy and wasn't scary at all. Well, the only thing we would have to do is get some people to be an audience, so we thought we needed some ads. And Jimmy Stewart had a printing set, and he couldn't read, but he went home and he got the printing set, and he brought it back, and we made little signs and tiny little ads. We put them on all our friends' doorsteps. We didn't want to meet our friends because they would ask us what was going to be in it, and we didn't really know. And then we got back to my house, and since it was my yard, I was the boss, so I told everybody where they should stand. And then we were all good, then they all practiced going into the middle so that we could do our act. And we never did get to rehearse at all because the noontime town dinner siren ran, and everybody went, so we all went home for lunch. And then when we got back at 1 o'clock, we thought, well, we better open the doors, because if my mother sees those doors open and she comes and stops us, it would be better to have it before everybody came. So we opened up the doors, and there wasn't a word out of my mother. And so I thought, well, she's saying to us, we can go right on with the show. And I thought, oh, we need to have some kind of dress rehearsal. Nobody was there. And so I said, let's all do our thing. And so I stepped forward and I said, step up this way, ladies and gentlemen. And I stopped because there were a couple of girls, they were like 8 or 9, and we'd never seen them before. And I went like this, and then I realized they couldn't sit on the cinders on the driveway. It was too painful. So I had to look for some cardboard for them from someplace, and things were getting very hectic. And at that moment, my father, without any warning, came around the corner, and it was his film pickup truck. He was in that, and it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was never home before 5, and I could not figure out what was going on. And the door of his truck slammed, and he was heading right over for us, and I didn't want him in front of all those 2 other girls. So I ran to sort of cut him off at the bird bath, and my mother was coming down out of the back of the house, and I thought, what does she know about any of this? And my dad said, who opened that door? And I said, well, I did, but we weren't even inside. We didn't even go inside the garage. We're going to do it right out in front, on the cinders. And we won't ever go near we didn't go into the garage really at all. We didn't go anywhere near your red canoe. And he said, I told you were not to go into the garage. And I said, yeah, I know, but it's a circus, and there's kids here. I mean, there's the audience is here already, and we'll never go near the doors again. And he said, close the door. And when he got like that, I knew there was no talking to him. And I didn't want to argue with him because I knew I didn't want to have all the other kids hearing that. So I stood there, and I thought, all right, but you just wait. And that's how I got into the theater.
I've never done this before, so I hope it comes out okay. Nuala was 6 months old when she came into my life. She was a Cairn Terrier with blonde, thick double-coated hair, if you know Cairn, and she had this wonderful pink tongue that rolled down, and it made, when you looked at her, she looked so content and happy. At the time I was living in Venice, California, and we in a house with a landlord that hated barking dogs, which was really a challenge with Nuala, who loved to bark. I'd have to be shaking the can with a nickel in it every time she barked. And then around the corner was a park that we went to and shared with neighbors who had gang members in their households. And the kids who tricked out their cars, it was amazing to see them. They were able to drive on 2 wheels around the neighborhood and over the whole block, with 2 wheels airborne. Amazing. They had dogs, working dogs. They were Rottweilers and pit bulls. And when they walked down the streets, you saw them with their masters who were shuffling, with the pants that were on the verge. They were really impressive with the metal, leashes, and very fierce-looking dogs. But Nuala and I, on the other hand, when we strolled around the neighborhood, we looked laughably defenseless. And but one day anyway, we were at the park, and a pit bull came up and attacked Nuala, and immediately she latched on to the throat of the pit bull, and she wouldn't let go. And so as the pit bull was trying to get her off, he kept on going back and forth. It ripped the throat open of the pit bull, and the owner and the pit bull ran out of the park. And we had, had a lot of birth after that. It's, what gave us a wide berth to walk through the neighborhood, because they didn't know anything about Cairns. Cairns were bred in Scotland, and they were the only dog. They were the size of the dog that could go through the hoop in the hoop law. Any dog bigger than that, the 99 people in the 99% category couldn't have. So she was a small dog in a big. She was a big dog in a small body, in a small package. So a year later, moved back to Boston, had a condo in Charlestown, and I built a door in the back so she could go out. She loved to bark at all the birds, and she'd be out on the roof barking away, and my neighbors would be terrified because they was always afraid that she was going to fall. But she was such a hardy dog. I knew that she would have no problem. And then a couple years later, I was pregnant with my daughter, and Nuala would be napping with me, and I would be thinking about how nice it will be when I have a child in the household, and Nuala will really enjoy being with her. She was incredibly smart. She was a dog that had an encyclopedic memory, so if she ever met you, she could remember that, your footsteps and your voice years later. It was amazing. And I really enjoyed, I took her on a lot of walks. I was working at home in those years, and we had a happy life. It was nice. But I had to call my mom from the hospital to let her know my water had broken, and very quickly, unexpectedly, I was about to give birth to my daughter, and I asked my mom to come and pick Nuala up, and she did, and I got, so a couple of hours later, Nuala was safely at my mom's house, and I had my baby in my arms, and I got a call from my neighbor that my house had burnt down. And so there had been a dryer fire from the house next door. But I felt so great knowing that Nuala hadn't been there, and everything, just material things, so that was great. After that, I moved to a house that on a busy street without a fence, so I couldn't keep her there. She ended up going to my mom's house. My mom lived on a dead-end street, so Nuala was leashless, and knew all the neighbors. She loved visiting them around, and they all loved her, so it was a great setup. But one day, I got a call from my mom to tell me that Nuala had died very unexpectedly, and it turned out later we discovered from Lyme's disease. She had heart. And so I went that day after work. I stopped at my mom's house to pick up my daughter, and as I got out of the car, my neighbor was walking by and offered me condolences. They all knew Nuala, and they felt awful about her passing, and I heard a bark. And I said, "Do you hear a dog barking? What is it?" And I realized it was Nuala. And he said, "No, I don't hear anything." And it was amazing to me that she had been waited for me all day to come to pick. She knew I'd be there to say goodbye, and that she had moved on.
You may have figured out by now that the Reillys tell stories. You heard my brother Michael, this is my brother Jerry. And we have 3 more sisters we could drag along if you really want to do this. Jerry talked a little bit about Northern Ireland and what it was like in the late 80s. In the early 90s, I was working a job that had me traveling to Northern Ireland 3, 4, 5 times a year and spending a lot of time in Derry and Belfast. I was working for what they called a cross-community group, which means they were both Catholics and Protestants on this committee, allegedly working very nicely together. They would make a point at different times of taking me aside and warning me about what goes on the other side, so there was a lot of that. And Northern Ireland at that time was scary in many ways. If you saw the words Northern Ireland in a newspaper article, it was going to be about a bombing or a killing. The fact is that if you looked into the numbers and you were there, the violence that happened was political. What they then called ODCs, ordinary decent criminals, didn't stand a chance. They really didn't. There wasn't a whole lot of stealing or grabbing bags or anything because the army was everywhere, there were police everywhere. So if you weren't involved in political violence, it was not a scary place, for me anyway. One of my trips, on almost all of my trips, I would plan to stay an extra few days, either at the beginning or the end, to do a bit of sightseeing. I mean, you're in Ireland, you know. So it was a trip that finished up in Belfast on a Friday morning, and I was due to fly out of Dublin on Monday night. I was going to have the weekend to do some things. I had a date to meet a friend in Dublin at 6 o'clock on Friday night. The drive from Belfast to Dublin at that time was 2.5 or 3 hours. It's faster now. So I was taking a leisurely drive, and I stopped in Newry, the last town in Northern Ireland before you cross the border into the Republic. Parked the car, the rented car I'd had all week, had some lunch, went into a few shops. When I came out and went back, my car wasn't there. And my first thought was, you stupid woman, you forgot where you put your car. So I walked around a little bit. I came back and I said, no, this is it. I remember that shop when I parked it. All right, I've got to report this to the police. Well, one of the dreaded institutions by many people at that time in Northern Ireland was the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. There were stories, you know, they would take you and you wouldn't be heard from for 10 days and they didn't need a reason to stop you, and, you know, there are all kinds of really scary things. But, you know, I'm an American, I'm reporting a stolen car. So I'm not going to worry about this. Ask someone where the police station is. It's a couple of blocks away. Walk to the police station. The first big shock was that the police station looked like and was an armed fortress. You don't just walk in the front door. It's a sheer wall, 2-3 stories high, and there's someone in a guardhouse up here. And there was a buzzer. So I pushed the buzzer, and someone shouted down from above, "What do you want?" Right, to get into a police station. I said, "My car's been stolen." He said, "I'll let you in." So a door buzzed, the door in front of me buzzed. I opened the door and walked in, and I was in a yard with some other buildings on the other side of the yard. But I was enclosed in a wire 10 by 10 by 10 foot cage. And there was, you know, a little door in it. And someone came over to the fence and said, "You're American? Where did you leave the car? What happened?" Asked me some questions. So now I'm starting to think about, this is really kind of scary, you know? And so they unlocked this gate, and he tells me, walk across the yard and into that building. Went over to that building, and getting, you know, really feeling just uncomfortable about the situation. I'm telling myself, you're reporting a stolen car. You're an American. This is not something to worry about. On the other hand, this is a scary place. So I pushed the buzzer on this building. A steel door goes as this motor opens it. And the minute I stepped through it, it closed again. So, you know, there was a sensor or someone was watching. I'm now in like an 8 by 8 by 8 foot room with a locked door on the other side and 2 cameras looking at me. So about this time, I realized that if I don't show up in Dublin at 6 o'clock tonight, my friend Anne-Marie is just going to figure something changed. This was before cell phones were common. I had no way to get in touch with her. She's not going to worry about it. She's, you know, figured that she'll hear from me later. No one is going to know I'm missing until I don't get off that plane on Monday night and my husband realizes, gee, I was kind of expecting her home tonight. And even he might say, I guess she decided to stay another day. You know, that would have been certainly possible for me. So it could be Monday night or Tuesday before anyone knows I'm missing if these people, you know, don't treat me right. And I really, and then the other side of me is saying, come on, you know, you're reporting a stolen car, what can happen? But I'm, unusually for me, really tense. The door opens, and an officer comes in, and he says, oh, how are you, Mrs.? I'm Constable Nichols. You look like you've had a terrible fright. Come and let me make you a cup of tea. And he did. And they then told me that there were 2 options. The car had been stolen by professionals, in which case it was already on a barge to somewhere, and my luggage probably had been thrown out in the road. Or it was taken by joyriders, in which case it would turn up within a few hours next morning at the worst case, and they would find it again. they advised me to get in touch with my husband, and I think they put the call through, because if the luggage was thrown out and someone found it, they might call my husband, because that would be the identification, to say, we found your wife's luggage, which could be a worry. So they arranged, I think they put the call through for me to do that. They called my hotel in Dublin to say I was on my way and that, there had been a complication. They took me to the bus terminal, and I got on the bus and went to Dublin with no luggage. Luckily, I had my passport, some money, and I think my airline ticket even in my handbag. So got off the bus in Dublin, walked, it was only 4 or 5 blocks to the hotel. When I got to the hotel, there was a message for me to call the Belfast police back. I called them back, they said, we found the car, we need you to come back. So back on a bus, back to Belfast, they met me at the bus station, they took me to where the car was. Now they have to treat the car as a possible car bomb, because it's been out of my control for a while. So they formally asked my permission to open the car, make me go around the corner while they open it. It's fine. The kids, and it was within 2 or 3 miles of where I had left it. It was left back. We assume they're young guys. The guys who took it never opened the trunk, so my luggage was okay, and my computer, and that was like a really new thing for me to be able to carry a laptop computer with me, were still in the trunk. So the Officer Nichols is back, my friend with the T. And he said, well, did they take anything out of the car? I said, well, there were sunglasses and there were some prescription pills. And he said, oh, were the pills marked? And I said, no, they were in a little daily pill minder. And he said, oh, can I ask you what sort of pills they were? And I said, well, I had probably 4 days worth of estrogen supplements. He said, I hope they tried them. He said, go on to Dublin and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
So moving on, when I heard the theme of moving on, I was thinking of a more physical, actually moving. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this story. Has anyone out there ever driven an RV before? No. I drove it once for about a week. I had an opportunity to do that. My wife had a job interview down in Virginia, and we thought, well, if we're down there anyways, let's tour around some of the states we've never seen before, and we thought, well, it'd be fun to do in an RV rather than a car and a hotel, so we tried that. And it's a lot different than driving a car. It's got to be nice on the road, which wasn't easy for me coming from up here. You let the truckers kind of flash their high beams if it's time to move over and the lane is safe and all that stuff. So anyways, we got in an RV after our job interview, which ended up being successful, and we kind of tooled around from Virginia through Kentucky into Tennessee, and then ended up in Mississippi. And our first night in Mississippi, I remember it was night, we kind of went south from Memphis to Tunica, which has a bunch of casinos, so that was kind of fun. And it seemed like a cool state driving around it. The next day, we got back on the road, and this was, I believe it was Halloween of October 2003, so not that long ago. And we ended up in Tupelo, which is where Elvis was born. You can go to his house where he was born, and we didn't have a big RV, but the RV was pretty close to the size of Elvis's house. But it was still cool to see it, and you'd be driving along the highway, and you'd see pieces of cotton floating from the fields across the road, and it looked like it was snowing and stuff like that. So it was kind of a cool experience. And as we were driving along, heading east, it was time to gas up the RV, and they're a big gas tank. It's usually 40 gallons even for a small RV, so you end up pulled into a kind of a typical truck stop gas station you'd see off the highway there, and we pulled over and started filling up this tank, which takes a while. So my wife went into the store that was part of the gas station there, and she was gone for a while. She came out and she said, "Oh my God, you've got to go in there." So I said, "Okay," because we were still filling up and I needed a drink. Anyway, so I went in, and nothing jumped out at me when I looked around, really. So I was like, okay. And went around and got a snack, drink, whatever. And I heard someone from behind me say to someone else, "Wow, that's a great Halloween costume." And I looked around, and the clerk was dressed in blackface, looking like an African American with the paint on her face in 2003. And I had never seen a costume like that before. And anyways, went and got up there. Actually had to have a small conversation to buy stuff from her. And interesting to hear the Huck Finn story earlier, because some things I guess never change. But anyways, went out, told my wife, I think we're ready to go now, and we moved on from Mississippi to Alabama and never went back after that. Thank you.
In my line of work, I travel a lot. I just used to travel a lot. I still travel, but I used to travel a lot. I used to go to the Middle East all the time. And I've learned so much from those people. And by the way, the Middle East was a wonderful place when I was there. And we just had some great times. But the first story we had tonight, the gentleman, sorry I can't remember your name, spoke about his negotiating with a certain person in his business. And negotiation is something which I consider myself fairly good at, and I learned from the best. I learned from absolutely the best. And so negotiation is something that we all do. I don't think anybody here in this room, maybe some would, you wouldn't think of going into a grocery store and negotiating over the cost of a loaf of bread. But you gotta try it sometime. It's kind of fun. But the story I want to relate tonight is, and I have several, but this particular one, when I first went to Persia with my dad in 1959, I was a young guy. I was a 17-year-old high school kid. And probably the last thing I wanted to do at that time, being a very normal American teenage boy, was probably not to go to Iran. But he talked me into it, and so we went, and it was fabulous. And so when we finally got to Iran, we decided to... He hadn't been back in Persia since he left. Now, he left Persia as a refugee in 1917 or so, and that's another whole story. That's for another night. It's a wonderful story. And so he was very eager to kind of see everything. We had gone to see his mother. She was still alive. Before we left, she was in the hospital. She was moving on. And he told her that he was taking me back to Iran. And she cried and she shrieked and said, "You can't do that, don't do that." Because all she could remember was what it was like when they left, how terrible things were. And so she thought that was a pretty bad idea. But anyway, times had changed, things were better. They changed again, but they were better then. And when we got there, we rented a car and a driver, and we had this Islamic driver, Ali. He was quite a character. And we decided to my dad had an idea of where he wanted to go, and so we went across the country. Now, you got to remember, in those days, there were no roads really. I mean, there were cart paths. It was really very, 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 very hard to do anything. And so we were out there driving, and one night we were trying to get to a certain village, and the car started acting up, and it was starting to get dark. And the car was, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but the car was not being agreeable. So we decided that we had to find some place to sleep. And we were driving along, and we came around a corner, and we saw off in the distance the lights of this village. So we headed for the village. We drove into the village. The village had electricity, which meant they had a generator. And they had strung around light bulbs, bare light bulbs, looked like a circus. And but they loved that. They loved the color and the light and the intensity, and it was a party. They were having a great time. Well, we went into the village and we didn't know what exactly to do. And Ali, the driver, was a little scared. He didn't know quite what to do. So we decided to find something. So we went to the police station. And we got to the police station and the police said, well, there's no place to stay. I mean, there's nothing here where you can stay. And Ali he went on. He had this great story about how he had these American dignitaries here. He was driving them, and they had to find a place for him to do something. And so finally, the police decided that the only thing you can do is to sleep here in the courtyard. They had a courtyard inside the police station, and so we drove into the courtyard, and the courtyard was just nothing. It was just a barren area with walls around it, and they dragged out some cots that they had, and they didn't have enough cots. They didn't have much of anything, so my father decided that he would sleep on one of those cots, and I decided that I'll sleep in the car, and Ali decided he'd sleep in the car in the front seat. So we all got ready to do what we had to do, and my eyes were wide open. I mean, I had never seen anything like this. Talk about culture shock, and this was just unbelievable. And I'm glad my mother wasn't there. So, and so I'm sure my father was glad she wasn't either. So in a few seconds, as we were getting ready, these men came out with machine guns, and it wasn't St. Valentine's Day, but they came out with these machine guns, and they all ringed around us with these machine guns. They were our guards. They were going to guard us through the night, and I thought that was pretty spectacular. And so we did what we had to do, and there was a little pool of water in the area there where we could kind of wash our faces and hands or whatever. It was freezing cold. And now, by the way, this is freezing cold, but this is July, and it's a daytime temperature of probably 100 to 120, and but yet the water, because the water was constantly moving, was very cold, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so we washed up and got ready for bed and went to bed and tried to, do the best we could. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe, I woke up and I looked out. I looked over at where my dad was, and I saw that he had kind of kicked the blanket off or something. So I decided I'd go over there and I'd, fix the blanket off for him. And I looked at all these policemen with all the machine guns. They were all sound asleep. And they got these guns on them, but they're all sound asleep. And they didn't even wake up when I got up and I walked around. So anyway, we slept there, we did the best we could, got up in the morning. Now, another thing that I did was, I had an American passport, and my passport, I kept it right here in this pocket, facing out, so everybody could see that I was American. So I went to the pool of water where I could wash my face, and I kind of leaned over the pool, and I felt the passport kind of slipping out of my pocket. I grabbed it, thank God, because if I'd lost that passport, I'd probably still be there. And another reason for the passport was that it was very important that they understood that I was an American. My father, who was born in Persia, even though he was a naturalized American citizen and had an American passport, he was still considered that he was Persian, that he was an Iranian. So what they could do and have done, is decide that, well, I really, because I was considered the same, because I was his son, maybe I should spend a couple of years in the military. And that didn't I didn't really know that, but now that I know about it, I thought, gee, that's kind of nice that I didn't have to do that. And so anyway, we spent the night there, and I mean, just getting to the village was such an experience. So next morning came. Now the car still was inoperable, or semi-operable. So Ali got out there, and I don't think he had any idea what he was doing, but he went through the motions, opened the trunk, looked under the car, banged on this and punched on that. He must have hit the right thing because it suddenly started working again. And so anyway, I thought that was pretty amazing. And so we all piled back in the car and we took off again. Now, we hadn't eaten anything. We wanted some breakfast. We wanted to eat something. So we came up to this village, this little village not too far away, where there was things growing in the field, and there was a guy out on the road. When he saw us coming, he came out to the road, and he had a handful of cucumbers. Now, he had this handful of cucumbers, and he said there were, I don't know, a dozen cucumbers or whatever it was. And he wanted whatever he wanted for them. So we bought them. And when my dad started to open it up, the cucumbers, all around the outside, there were like 3 or 4 larger cucumbers, and all the ones in the middle were like pencils. And that's something that, it's interesting because business in the Middle East is such that it's a game of mental gymnastics all the time. You always have to be on your guard, and you have to understand what it is that's going on. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's fun, and you have to keep a sense of humor when you're doing all this. Even though you're screaming at each other, you still have to have a sense of humor. So anyway, we ate our cucumbers and had some water, and we took off again, and we went on. We came to another village. We'd been driven for quite a while. Came to another village into a town. Oh, by the way, the name of the area where we spent the night, the name of it was Davandara. Davandara means Devil's Corner, which I thought was a great place to spend a holiday. So we went on to the next village, as I said later, and it was the name of the village was Nahabedian, and there was an American organization that was there, and they had a compound and so forth. And this was this was at a time when the United States was trying to help with agricultural products, agricultural information, and they had a program there, Point 4 they called it, and they had this compound. So we went into this compound, and but this was in Kurdistan. This was in Kurdistan. Beep beep. This was in Kurdistan. And anyway, we had a great time. I'll tell you next time, because I want to come to one of these again. No, it's all right. I can't not do it.
Well, that's the end of our program tonight, and if we could, can we get all the storytellers? Come on up here, all the storytellers. Everyone. And we're going to be doing this again. So every one of you can come up here. Come on, take a walk. Look at the lights in your face, the microphone. Come on, check it out, and come back next time and do it. Yeah.